Welcome to Think Tech on OC16, Hawaii's weekly newscast on things that matter to tech and to Hawaii. I'm Jay Fidel.
And I'm Lisa Mariyama.
In our show tonight, we'll cover the panel program presented by the Hawaii Venture Capital Association and Think Tech at the Plaza Club on July 28th, featuring the new PUC.
Under moderator Carl Friedman, the speakers were PUC Chair Mina Morita, PUC Chief Counsel Kat Awakuni, PUC Chief Researcher Josh Strickler, and Consumer Advocate Jeff Ohno.
After opening remarks, Carl Friedman introduced the panel. This is the year of renewable energy. There's a new wind farm in Kahuku. There'll be another one in Kauai Loa on the North Shore. Another one planned on Maui. The wind farms contemplated in Lanai and Molokai are problematic. DBED is working hard to lay a cable from there to Oahu. Mililani Trask, who joins us today, has proposed a new kind of public-private partnership for geothermal. The newspapers are bristling with stories about energy progress and problems. Even APEC's theme, 90 days from now, is guess what? Renewable energy. That's what they're going to talk about. Suffice to say that the energy story, at least for Hawaii, is potentially at full throttle. Do we know how it's going to play out between now and 2030? No, it's a high-stakes, big-money game. Ultimately, we'll replace $7 billion of imported oil. Do we know what sources, what companies will prevail in that game, and when and how? Not yet, but as we go forward, the outline will emerge and will change our state, our economy for sure, and our lives.
It's the responsibility of the PUC to ensure that the rates that are charged by utilities are reasonable, that the costs are allocated fairly to the different customers, and in the process of doing that, to examine utility programs and capital expenditures and plans to make sure that what money they are spending, and ultimately will have to be paid by all of us one way or another, is in the best public interest. It's a broad mission. It's challenging. There are many people, I notice many faces in the room who appear before the PUC with carrying one banner or another, not always in agreement with each other. But in looking at these things, it involves some knowledge of certainly economics, certainly law, certainly public policy, and more engineering.
First, we heard from PUC Chair Mina Morita.
Yes, I think the description of this panel as new is a misnomer. New PUC is a misnomer, and what we really are is an evolving PUC. And as Carl mentioned, this evolution started with the former chair, Carlito Caliboso. And the two drivers in this was a legislative audit and the study done by the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum in looking at the structure of the PUC, the backlog of dockets, the amount of time it took for the dockets to move through, and they came up with a reorganization plan, which really hasn't been implemented because the PUC hasn't been fully funded. But a lot of credit has to go to the Chair Caliboso during his period, because he set up the ability for myself to come in and move forward in a different direction rather than having to deal with a backlog of dockets. And so I believe it's Kat, Josh, Brooke Kane, who's our administrative director, as well as Commissioners Caliboso and Cole, that represent the second stage of the evolution of the PUC, where we're attempting to lead on emerging issues and to frame the discussion and the solutions rather than just preside over dockets. And that's a big difference. Usually when people hear about PUCs across the country, it's a matter of just waiting for the issues to come before it like a court, rather than taking charge and leading on these issues. So I believe that's the most important characteristic of this evolving PUC and this stage. But part of this challenge to this approach of leading is to build the capacity within the PUC. Many of the issues that we face today, Hawaii is on the cutting edge, especially in the regulation of electricity. People like Kat and Josh are anomalies. They can probably make 2 or 3 times as much money in the private sector, but they chose public service. And both the commission as well as the consumer advocate face staff and resource asymmetry with the companies that we have to regulate, the companies that we whose performance and that we oversee. So to do this, we need to pay the kinds of wages to our professional staff, and these are the accountants, attorneys, engineers, economists, to attract these professions into the public service so we can have this balancing rather than this resource and staff asymmetry. But unfortunately, a significant part of the public service tax, which is collected to fund both the PUC and the consumer advocate, are diverted to the general fund.
Our second speaker was PUC Chief Counsel Kat Awakuni.
As a commission goes through all of these different proceedings, we need to be thinking about probably, 3 different things. What are the regulators' powers? And so what are we kind of allowed and required to do? What cannot we do? And so we're always kind of testing the bounds of what we can and cannot do. We also have to consider what procedures we need to follow, because it is a quasi-judicial process. We need to be concerned about process and ensure that everyone has a fair opportunity to be heard. And then finally, what are the buyers and sellers' rights and obligations? Because these are do involve a lot of different business transactions, and so we need to have a good understanding of what everybody is entitled to do and what they're not entitled to do, and kind of insert ourselves, kind of as need be. All of these answers to these questions that we consider result from various legal sources. We have substantive state law. And in Hawaii, it's chapters 269, 271, and 271G of the Hawaii Revised Statutes. That establishes the Commission's duties and powers, our authority, our general authority. So that's kind of, our Bible that we look to. There's also substantive federal law that we need to look to as well, and that spans the gamut from, PURPA, the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act of 1978, the Telecom Act of 1996, the Energy Policy Act of 2005, among others. So we have to be, aware of, again, what our rights and duties, our powers are as we're kind of looking at these different issues, because, Congress has decided a lot for the states as well. We also have our own administrative law, chapters 91 and 92, and then the Commission's own policies or administrative rules relating to policies and practice before the Commission. And then there's quite a few federal constitutional limits that are placed upon the Commission as well, upon our powers. And so the Commerce Clause, which restricts the state's power to regulate and discriminate against interstate commerce. And so we need to, take these things into consideration as well as a Contract Clause, which restricts the state's power to impair existing contracts. And so that's kind of challenging too sometimes, as we're looking at different kinds of PPAs and or power purchase agreements that, that people are working with, and, hey, PUC, can't you just undo that because we don't like what's happened anymore? So, there are limits, to what the Commission can do. The Takings Clause prohibits government regulation which takes property away from owners without providing just compensation, and so we need to consider those kinds of things as well. Supremacy Clause, which preempts states from enacting or applying state laws inconsistently with congressional intent. And then finally the Due Process Clause, again, so we need to ensure that people are heard and have a fair and understandable process.
Then we heard from PUC Chief Researcher Josh Strickler.
PUC is currently working on approximately 70 dockets right now, and that's from rate cases to power purchase agreements to energy efficiency standards and new renewable integration issues. That's on top of our normal telecom, water carrier, motor carrier caseload. So Kat just explained to you some of the legal issues that go into the process. And I'm going to talk to you today instead of about all 70 of those, because we'd be here for a couple of hours and I only have 5 minutes. I'm going to talk to you about 3 of those. But to explain it better how they work together, the 3 that I'm going to talk about are the feed-in tariff and the renewable reliability standards working group, the energy efficiency portfolio standards docket, and the IRP. But to explain how those worked and how they fit together, I need to take a little detour. So just indulge me a little bit. I love to listen to podcasts about the economy. I don't know who else here does. I'm sure in this room there's a lot of venture capitalists that pay attention to that. Marketplace, Planet Money, and my favorite is Freakonomics. For those of you who know about Freakonomics, it's a podcast. They say they seek to explore the hidden side of everything. And they had a recent news article about a restaurant called Le Pain Quotidien. And I apologize, Bill, I don't have any French in me. I'm all redneck. And so if I said that wrong, I'll have you come up and explain that later. Le Pain Quotidien is an organic food restaurant. Started out in Belgium, did very well, and is expanded and is now a chain. And they actually have restaurants in New York City. So let me set the scene for you. In New York City's Upper West Side, a woman walks into Le Pain Quotidien, sits down and orders a salad. They bring to her salad, and she sits down, and in front of her is a big bowl of leafy greens and an entire dead mouse inside the salad. And so what they went through in the article was about how Le Pain Quotidien, I shouldn't have picked a French restaurant, went through that process of dealing with this mouse in the salad. And they looked at what went into why that happened, and what processes broke down from the farm to the kitchen to the server all the way to the table. And what they came up with was it was a problem of rapid growth that had led to this mistake. So what stuck out to me in this article was the conversation the authors had with the CEO of the restaurant. When this event occurred, people on the board pretty much panicked. They said, okay, we need to go away from organic. This is going to start happening more. We're going to have more of these kinds of events occurring, and we should just stop. Let's just fry everything and be done with it. And the CEO said, no, we're going to stick this out. We are an organic food model. This is how we got started. This is how we grew, and this is the direction we're going in. So why am I talking to you about mice and salad, since a lot of you just ate a salad? And I'm not trying to gross you out. I'm trying to get your attention is what I'm trying to do. Because there's a strong parallel between what happened in that story and where we're going with our energy system. See, we're on a path for more renewable generation in our electrical system. I think a lot of people would agree that's the right way to go. There's a lot of benefits to going renewable, just like there's a lot of benefits to eating organic. But when you go and you pick a path, you've got to understand that there's risk and benefit associated with that path. Just like you get the benefits of getting healthier food, you may run into more bugs in your apples and maybe mice in your salad when you eat more organic food. And I'm not trying to downplay organic, but as you put more renewable into your system, you're going to run into more system reliability issues.
Our last panelist was the consumer advocate, Jeff Ohno.
When Governor Abercrombie appointed me as the consumer advocate, I called my mom and I told her what job I was taking, and she's 92 years old right now, and she said, well, you should do great at that job because you like to shop more than any man in this state. I think she was joking. Anyway, I hope she was joking. But the role of the consumer advocate is to represent the consumer's interests by advocating for reliable utility service at reasonable customer costs. To do this, the consumer advocate reviews applications filed by the public utilities for rate increases, for capital expenditures, and key to renewable energy issues, power purchase agreements, or PPAs. And these are the contracts between the electric utility, HECO, and independent power producers. Now, because the consumer advocate is to represent the consumer's interests, let me give you at least my impressions of Hawaii's consumers. Number one, Hawaii's consumers are intelligent, educated, and aware of renewable energy issues. Second, Hawaii's consumers know and understand that we have to get off our dependence on foreign oil. They understand that we need to move toward renewable energy. And lastly, Hawaii's consumers, in spite of our wonderfully clean air and in spite of what Michelle Bachmann says about carbon dioxide being natural and found in the air, they understand that we have to reduce our carbon footprint because it contributes to global warming. So it would seem to be an easy task to move toward renewable energy, but it really hasn't been. And part of the reason is Hawaii's consumers. Hawaii's consumers do not understand why it is that their electric rates go up rather than down whenever renewable energy generation projects come online. Hawaii's consumers do not trust HECO, they do not trust the PUC, and they do not trust the consumer advocate. Finally, Hawaii's consumers are all in favor of renewable energy until it goes into their backyard. And that's kind of what I want to talk about right now. NIMBYism and what it means to the PUC and the consumer advocate as the state moves forward with its goal of ending its dependence on petroleum-based oil. NIMBY, we all understand what that means, not in my backyard. It is a somewhat inappropriate term used to describe the situation where a community rises up and blocks a certain renewable energy project. And I say somewhat inappropriate because NIMBYism and renewable energy has gone beyond just the community that is directly affected. For some, it is not on my island. For others, it is not in my state. And for still others, it is not on this planet.
Finally, we let each of the panelists take a minute to close.
Both in the Consumer Advocate's Office and at the PUC, we need resources and we need continuity. The challenges that we face will not be solved election cycle to election cycle.
Integrated resource plan, I think it's a great opportunity for a lot of folks that haven't taken part in the process so far to maybe come forward. We hear a lot from the utility, we hear a lot from the independent power producers. We need to get more perspective from the actual customers.
The IRP is supposed to look at a 20-year horizon, 5-year action plan. It is trying to draw out kind of a long term plan for the utilities, looking at different scenarios because we don't know exactly which resources are going to be, best used, and we don't want to end up with a plan that is then going to be obsolete.
These are extremely difficult economic times for everyone, especially for Hawaii's consumers. Many people who are being laid off from their jobs, who haven't had raises for years, and yet are being asked to foot the bill for higher utility rates, not just electricity, water, sewer, and most recently for inter-island shipping.
We were particularly interested in the post-panel remarks offered by Bill Spencer, president of the Hawaii Venture Capital Association.
Mina, you brought up something that's so interesting and so important, and that is the notion that, you were on the other side of the table. You were a legislator. You were writing laws that now you're implementing. There are a couple of your colleagues who are also in that position, Director Kokubun, Director Takamine. I hope when next session comes around, you'll remind your colleagues that are still making laws about this very important lesson. The challenge that you face, which I understand, is that you've got to create the space for new energy entrepreneurs to show up in, because that's where the excitement is, that's where the potential is. NIMBYism, I find there's a better word these days than NIMBY. It's called banana. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. And, Hawaii is challenged. We have the opportunity to be a clean energy state and really set the pace. So it's a tough challenge, and I hear you on that. And finally, with regards to the community benefit package, on the one hand, I sort of resonate with the notion that this should be a requirement. But on the other hand, achieving energy sustainability, achieving food sustainability and food security, that is the benefit.
Thanks to the speakers, they were great. And thanks to the sponsors, Hawaii Business Magazine and the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum, for helping us put this program together.
Oh yeah, we need
It's really exciting to see so much participation and willingness of the PUC to bring their staff and the consumer advocate to come out and try and explain what they're doing and where they're going. This is something that is not typical in most commissions.
I think it was a great session, and I myself was very, very happy to hear from Mina, to hear from the public advocate, and to get a better understanding of what their challenges are.
I didn't hear how we're going to get there in 10 years or 20 years. I heard all kinds of excuses about why we can't do this, why we can't do that, why is the electric company not capable of handling alternative energy, why we're understaffed, and so on.
I thought it was a great panel today. There was a lot of optimism in the room, and you can see that the new leadership at the PUC are really going to take us in a great direction.
Well, having such a large crowd was really impressive, and like I said, one of our main challenges is to demystify the PUC and how we serve the public interest, so I think we accomplished that today.
The key thing that I wanted to get out was the message about the advisory group. We're looking for people, we want more people to take part, and hopefully we can get a good cross-section of folks to take part in the IRP plan. We got to pay attention to the system and make sure bad things don't happen, so we all have to work together on that.
Another great time. It's always good to get all our energy stakeholders together, and one of my takeaways is that we're still working real hard on getting the process right.
Well, this is a really, I think, a good dialogue today, talking about some of the challenges that the regulators and the regulated community face in terms of navigating this path, this multi-billion-dollar transition to a clean energy future.
I thought it was a really excellent program, Jay. It's good to have the PUC out in the community interacting with the stakeholders, and it does clearly show that the Commission is taking kind of a fresh look at these critical issues.
It was really an inspiring session with everybody. Thank you for putting it together.
I'm happy that you invited us. Thanks
So
very
that
much.
means when we have a follow-up program, you'll come down again?
Yes, sir.
All right, got it.
And now here's Bill Spencer again with this week's Spensation.
They have a huge job on their hands, and they're under-resourced and understaffed. And this may be the case with many state agencies. I think the last administration left things in a shambles at best. And what surprised me was they have 62 positions available to them, but they can't even fill all those positions because they don't have enough space in their offices to accommodate all the positions. And that means they have to find new space, and they don't have money for new space. These kinds of things are, really trivial, but look what they're getting in the way of. An organization that has 70 dockets to process, some frivolous maybe, some not, but nonetheless everybody gets fair treatment, even the contested cases. It's a miracle anything gets done, and in this case in particular, how are we going to achieve our energy independence objectives when the agency that really is in charge of making it happen is in a stranglehold?
Yeah, I mean, just think about the $7 billion that goes offshore for fossil fuel, imported fossil fuel. They could save us that money. They could keep that money. They are under a mandate to keep that money here. They've got an enormous job to do, but not only is it enormous, it has enormous effect on all of us. So really, there shouldn't be issues about whether they can hire staff and whether they have enough money to keep on going. They should have all the money they need. They have the biggest job imaginable, those guys.
The other thing that is of concern to me and dear to my heart is that clean energy has so much potential for Hawaii's entrepreneurs. There's new technologies, new opportunities, yet the PUC wants to vet everything and make sure that there are no glitches and that these new technologies won't introduce problems. And that even compounds further the challenge because we can't get in the way of innovation.
It's not impossible to move quicker, and that's what they've got to do. To me, that's one of their biggest challenges, and it's on the table right now.
Our government can't afford to be hamstrung. And I think next year's legislative session really has to look at how to break the log jams across the board.
Yeah, and energy is one of the most important things affecting our future in every way. It reaches into every aspect of the state and the people in the state, and that's why the PUC is at the center, must have all the funding it needs, and the legislature has to find a way to provide that support.
I agree.
We'll be right back to wrap up this week's edition of Think Tech. But first, we want to thank our underwriters.
Thanks to the Scheidler Family Foundation, which supports a number of educational, cultural, and charitable organizations, including Think Tech.
Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates NECO on Maui and HELCO on the Big Island are deeply committed to the communities they serve.
Galen Ho is a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company.
Oceanit, another local tech company, is one of Hawaii's largest and most diversified science and engineering companies.
Okay, Lisa, that wraps up this week's edition of Think Tech. Remember, you can watch Think Tech on OC16 several times every week. Can't get enough of it, just like Lisa does. For additional times, check out OC16.tv.
For lots more Think Tech videos and for underwriting and sponsorship opportunities on Think Tech on OC16, visit thinktechhawaii.com. Be a sponsor and help us reach Hawaii.
I'm Jay Fidel. Thanks for joining us on Think Tech.
I'm Lisa Mariyama. Aloha, everyone.